Hey everybody, Andrew and Josh from Gameosity, and today we're going to be looking at Pillars of the Earth, which is one of, if not the original worker placement game.
So the Pillars of the Earth was recently re-released after a long time of being out of print. It was one of these Grail games for a long time.
Which isn't to say a game printed by Grail Games. Rather a holy Grail game.
Absolutely. Very good. Right, yes. So KOSMOS brought it out for its new edition, and it is, and a lot of people are really thrilled about this. It's designed by Michael Rieneck and Stefan Stadler. It's got gorgeous art by Michael Menzel, which
yeah, and not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I mean, let's spoil the review. We're gonna gush about this one.
Oh, it's fantastic!
It's really, really good.
It's very good. It's a very good game.
And so we'll take a little bit of a look at the mechanisms and give you sort of a tour around the board, and then we'll come back to just yammer about how good it is.
It's one of those games that, I listened to people on the Dice Tower go on and on about it, and I thought, well, it can't be that good, right?
Because what do they know, right? That's an odd jab.
It turns out they know a couple things.
It turns out Dice Tower might know some games.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's take a look at it in a little bit of detail, and then let's talk more about how much we like it. In Pillars of the Earth, the board is, well, kind of everything. Each turn, each round, every player's master builders are going to go into this bag, and turn order will be determined by shaking the bag, drawing them out, and in order that they are pulled, they will either be activated immediately by the player paying a cost associated with the order in which they were pulled, or they will be held for later, in which case they will be able to be assigned to spots for free. And of course what that means is that player order is completely random each round, and that means that strategy around what action you take when is going to depend very heavily on what gets pulled in what order. Each of the spaces around this board, there are 14 of them, is a different opportunity to either gather resources, get some points, get some coin, hire new craftsmen, take on advantages, or interact with the game's market, or build the cathedral, which is ultimately one of the key facets of the game and the turn tracker. When your master builder is placed, you will simply place them at whatever master builder location you think suits you best at that point in the turn order, and once all master builders are assigned across the entire round, only then will they be triggered in order. These different actions will allow you to not only gather the resources that you're going to spend on building the cathedral, but also upgrade your own sort of personal engine, which is comprised of your craftsmen. Each player starts out with a few basic craftsmen, which will allow you to turn resources into points. Over the course of the game, you will be able to hire more advanced versions of these basic craftsmen that will either let you take the action of converting to points more efficiently or more frequently, and then you'll actually be able to get specialized craftsmen which do much more, using either just straight up coins to convert to points or combinations of advanced resources. Over the course of the game, you'll be able to upgrade this little engine that you've built, and it's one of the ways that you'll run it to earn points. And that's Pillars of the Earth. So, what do we think?
It's so great. This is a kind of game that really appeals to me for a number of reasons. It really feels like I'm in safe hands. It feels like there's a...
You know what? I get that.
You know
Absolutely.
What I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that can go wrong in this game. the positions are all numbered, so...
I mean, it's very methodical.
Each round, you just go from number to number and do whatever you're supposed to do.
And that actually... I mean, it's funny to point out that, like, the spaces are numbered as being a feature, but honestly... It's a tremendously good user experience design. There was a lot of really smart thought that went into the way this board was set up. It's a very busy board. Mm-hmm. There's art all over the place, and yet it's impossible to get lost on it.
Right.
You know, every space has its action fairly well laid out. And as you say, as you proceed through the round and you move around the board, things trigger in sequence. You can kind of plan a little bit, turns up, actions up at the top that'll then hopefully allow you to take actions down at the bottom, and you see how that all shakes out.
There's a real elegance to it, which I think is a feature of older games too, right? I mean, this does feel like a game that has been rescued from the past. This era of games which are in certain ways simpler. It's almost you get the feeling when you play this game that everything extraneous has been
sheared away,
exactly,
in a really interesting way,
and you're left with this beautiful kind of these bare bones mechanisms that all make sense with each other.
Absolutely. And what you say about it feeling sort of like very clean in this older way is driven by, I think, in part because it was at the crest of this wave, and so you didn't need to be like, it's a worker placement game that also has an area control element, but you do a dexterity game to do that. It's not the merging of a bunch of different game mechanics. Right. It is this game mechanic unto itself. I mean, everything about it speaks to a degree of cleverness in its design. One of my favorite things about it is the way you determine player order, the drawing of the master architects from the bag, and you're either going to, when yours comes out, like sometimes you're actually hoping that you're going to get pulled later rather than earlier, because if you get pulled too soon, it might be super expensive to take an action.
And you just don't want to make those difficult decisions, Just,
let someone because
someone else cope with that. When it gets cheaper, then
I don't know. Because something that you've said about this game that I agree with and I appreciate is the fact that you never feel like you're completely led astray. Like wherever you land on the board as an action, it's going to benefit you in some way.
Yes. There are 14 things you can do on this board, and none of them work against you.
Yeah.
And I found that there were rarely, if ever, a time where I didn't have something valuable to do with my workers, which is great.
Yeah, because there's nothing that sucks more in a worker placement game than being like, it doesn't matter where I go. Like, I can't do the thing I set out to do.
Right.
This isn't a game where you need to plan 10 turns ahead. In fact, it's a game you can't plan 10 turns ahead.
Right. It's got 6 rounds, and each of these rounds is its own kind of strategic puzzle.
Right.
And you can only really think as far ahead as within this round, which is exactly the right amount of pre-planning and strategy. Any more than that, and it gets to be overwhelming. It feels like work. But this seems perfect.
The bag is a huge equalizer because it's going to stop you from being able to absolutely plan what you're going to do on your turn. It can only give you sort of that sort of vague guideline. And the other thing about it that I think is a really useful balancing mechanic is the fact that your engine is separate than anybody else's. So the little ecosystem that you build out of your workers and how efficiently it runs is another sort of mini challenge that happens kind of within your turn that isn't really affected by although obviously it has an impact. So I think that's oh man, it's just a good game.
It has something else which I always like in a game too, which is a sense of profusion. It doesn't feel so brutal, or it doesn't feel so tight that you can't make some interesting decisions. Or what's happening here?
just checking out the construction. But yeah, go on.
You only have a certain number of workers. And you think, there's some cards where you need 9 workers to get 4 wood. And that seems like a lot at the beginning of the game.
Right.
It
seems
am I ever going to spend 9 workers?
That's insane.
And there are places in the game within the 6 rounds where you think, that's a
reasonable exchange.
Yeah, right.
That I'm going to need to make.
I'm happy to do that because, I have 9 workers and I don't need to be doing anything else
and I need
that
wood or the stone to feed into my engine that's then going to, produce points or coins or whatever it is.
And I like a game where whatever the action is that seems that seems insurmountable at the
Unattainable,
beginning
right?
of the
Yeah.
game, by the middle or end of the game, seems totally reasonable.
And-
It really feels like you've made progress.
And this game has a lot of like shoring up what would be mechanically weaker choices with placements by adding little kickers. So like one of the spaces is these events that get turned over every round, and if you put a worker there or a master builder there, you're protected from the event. But sometimes events are positive, and so that would feel like that would feel like a big wasted placement if you put there and then it turns out that the event is not negative, that you're protected from a positive event,
Right.
but you get a resource anyway.
Right.
Just for you're either protected or you get a wild resource. So that's a really good way of adding value to what might otherwise be like a suboptimal placement.
Yeah. I mean, I never felt destroyed by the events, and I never
No.
felt, there's this little tax die, and you have to pay taxes. But,
Right. Unless you shelter yourself or
Right.
you have a friend or
Right. You
or
plan
whatever.
for it, and if you have to pay high taxes, you have to pay high taxes. But they never felt devastating.
Yeah, and the way the game handles currency, I actually really like, because it's very clear that you're going to earn and spend just sort of constantly, and there's always going to be this up and down of how much you have, and that makes it feel better.
Yes.
To both earn and spend, because there's no sense of like hoarding.
Right.
You don't like save and hope that you don't have to pay taxes, and it's like these big turns, big swings. You're going to hire the expensive people. You're going to earn lots of money when your engine goes off. The game just works, and it works by letting you do things.
Yes.
It's always encouraging you to like take an action, get a resource, hire bring in a new specialist, and then ultimately, of course, contribute to the construction of the cathedral, which is the round tracker, but also a major way of earning points. And at the end of the game, of course, it's the person who has the most points is going to win. But all along the way, you will have done things.
Right.
And that's really satisfying.
Yeah. And I do like the fact, too, that it's a game that's limited by a certain number of rounds. I always like a game where you have 6 rounds, and whatever's happening in those rounds, the game's going to be over after 6 rounds, no matter what. And so it feels like less of a race, and where you can fall behind, and more just kind of each round you do your best.
You engage it.
Some rounds you'll get ahead, other rounds you'll fall behind, but everyone's kind of having these backs and forths. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also like the idea that things like taxes and the events, they affect everyone, unless you have done something.
Unless you've taken your actions.
You've either taken an action or you've paid something in order to avoid those. So even if I get hit by the tax die and you don't because you've paid something for it, well, I think, well, he paid for that.
There's a balancing mechanic.
Right, so it feels very equitable.
So, what surprises me most, and what leads into sort of like us obviously recommending this game, is that for as much as is going on here, at no point did I feel like it was convoluted or complicated.
No.
There was some complexity to the decisions, but they were within these silos of the turns and the actions.
Yes.
And the game has such a deft hand of guiding you through the actions of a turn. It's like by the time you've taken your first round, you've kind of seen everything that the game does mechanically. And so you can start to think strategically.
Right.
You're no longer figuring the game out.
Right.
And you could almost take a turn as like a burner. And it's just be like, well, let's just play a turn.
Right.
And do whatever we do. And then you'll work your way through the board and be like, oh, this does that. Oh, now I get why I would ever do that.
Right.
Why would I ever just send someone to just get victory points? Well, no, actually, sometimes that's valuable. Right. And if you get the advantage cards, that gives you an additional point whenever you go to get point. It's like you build these little synergies, and you get what you kind of brought to my mind as these sort of micro victories.
Yes, right.
You accomplish these little goals within the structure of the game.
Right.
And
within that round, then you're just kind of pleased with yourself. You think, oh, well, that worked well.
Are you ever not pleased with yourself?
Very rarely.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm pleased with aside from you is Pillars of the Earth. I think this is a fantastic representation of the genre.
And it's also, the rule book is something, again, these 14 actions. When you're reading the rule book, you get to that place where it says, in each of the rounds, there will be 14 stages.
It's
and
like,
you think,
what? That's
right?
not great, right?
But then you look and it's like, this one, you just take money. This one, you take wood. This one, you take... So they've really kind of broken it down.
Yeah.
And whereas in a traditional worker placement game, because we're so used to them now, the getting of the wood, the stone, and the gravel would all be just one action, right? There's 3 different actions. So 3 of your 14 are simply getting resources.
Right.
And it's not complicated. However many workers you put there, you get a certain number of resources.
Yeah. that's
So the 14, that's also a little micro victory too, because you think, well, I've just mastered 14 different...
That's right.
14 different stages to a round.
And what's interesting about the round structure is that you sort of commit all of your master builders first, and
Yes.
then everything triggers in sequence.
Yes,
and so you
love that.
And so if you're smart, and if you're lucky, and if your placement's good, then you can take actions earlier in the sequence that will allow you to take actions later in the sequence, and you can kind of bank on your own success and make that kind of a strategic assessment.
I love that domino structure where you're setting up all the workers, everybody sets up their workers, and then you just tip
we
them
go
over one by one.
All right, this action, this action, this action, this action.
Right.
You go around,
and by that part of it, you've already made your decisions, so you're just seeing
the
your
resolutions
machine run.
Yes, the resolutions are actually really fast. The moment to moment decisions are tight, and I personally, I hugely recommend it.
Yes,
do you as well? Yeah.
For sure.
I thought so too.
It's an amazing game,
and well deserving of its reputation, which is extremely stellar.
Absolutely.
And there you go.
Thanks for watching, and if you want to see more of our videos, click here.
And if you want to see some of our Game in a Minute reviews, which are just like this one except way faster, go ahead and click here. And if you want to subscribe to Gameosity and follow along with all of our awesomeness, you're gonna have to click the orb, which is
kind of over
somewhere
over.
Do you think it's
it's
right about there?
A little lower.
Okay, we'll put it here. All right.